Next, we're going to taste the Novel Fine Ruby Porto from the Douro in Portugal. So this is a ruby port, and this is a fortified wine. Now there's several different styles of fortified wines that you'll find. The most famous are port, Madeira, and sherry, and we'll talk about port today. So this has a 19.5% alcohol. So something interesting about fortified wines is that all of them are made as base wines that have a high proof brandy or other type of spirit that are added to the product to increase the alcohol percentage. And that can be added at any time in the fermentation, whether before, during, or after fermentation. And when that high proof spirit is added, will determine the final flavors of the wine. So this particular wine is from the Douro region within Port. The Douro is a very rugged, wild, hilly area within Portugal, and it's split up into three regions. So the first is Baixo Corgo, and that's on the western side of the Douro. It's very fertile. Next is the Cima Corgo. This is on the central region of the Douro, and this is where most of the port production comes from. And next is Douro Superior. So the Douro Superior is upriver on the eastern side of the Douro, and this area, it has very wide temperature ranges, and it can be very dry there as well. They don't get very much rainfall. So there are some main grape varietals that are used in port production. The most popular is Touriga Nacional, and that one is actually not in this particular port. Some other grape varieties which are in this particular port are Touriga Franca, Tinta Roriz, and Tinta Barroca. So there are three main styles that you should know about when it comes to port wine, and that is ruby, tawny, and vintage port. This is an example of ruby port. Ruby is the most produced within Portugal. It's aged in large oak casks for 2 years before it's bottled. Tawny is aged even longer in oak casks to the point where it oxidizes and loses its bright red ruby color, and it turns almost like a copper color. And then vintage is very rare. The grapes are used from one particular year, and it's usually only made in the very best years. So for most of port, most rubies and tawnies that are in the marketplace, they're blended, so they're non-vintage. They're blended from several years to create a more consistent product, whereas the vintage port is the most exclusive and also rarest of the ports that you can find, and typically also very expensive as well, and it can age for a very long time. So let's go ahead and assess this wine. So fortified wines taste very different from a typical still wine. You definitely get some of the alcohol. You can definitely smell that in the aroma. Now when I look at this wine, it's definitely a classic ruby color, and it's very deep in color. It stains the side of my glass. I can see the legs are pretty thick on this wine, which leads me to believe that it's high in alcohol and also high in residual sugar. Now when I go to smell the wine, it smells exactly like what a ruby port should smell like. So I'm getting lots of deep cherry flavors, strawberry, even like a vanilla, a toastiness. Definitely that I get that oak. So there's cinnamon, nutmeg. It's just really pleasant on the nose. And there is a lot of black fruit as well. So blackberry, black cherry, the fruit is very ripe. It smells delicious. So I'm going to go ahead and taste it next. So on the palate, it's very rich. It's full-bodied. I definitely get those ripe blackberry and red cherry flavors. There's a lot of fruit coming through, both red and black fruit. It's spicy. There's a little bit of black pepper and leather and tobacco. And then I certainly get the baking spices and the vanilla from the oak aging process. The tannins are non-existent. It is high in sugar. It's very sweet. And there is a decent amount of acid. I would call it moderate acid for this wine. Now, if I were to pair this wine, there are lots of different ways that you could go. So a wine should always be sweeter than the food. So if you're pairing this with a dessert, the dessert should not be sweeter than the port. Now, this is a very sweet port, And so I'm not too afraid that any dessert would really be sweeter than this wine itself. I would definitely recommend it with chocolate, like chocolate truffles. It would be delicious with a flourless chocolate cake with like a raspberry puree. It would be really nice with a red fruit type dessert, and it would go well with cheese as well. So the traditional pairing for port wine is still in blue cheese. So any big blue cheese would definitely pair well with this wine. They really would complement each other. So this is a great example of a ruby port. It's by Novel from the Douro region within Portugal.